Alan and Shaun here from the Prancing Pony Podcast, welcoming you to the Tolkien Experience Podcast.
The Tolkien Experience Podcast is an attempt to bring the fan and scholarly communities together around our shared passion, the works of J.R.R. Tolkien. Each episode features a notable scholar or member of the fan community sharing their Tolkien experience.
And now we'll send you over to Sarah and Luke.
Thanks, Alan. I'm Sarah Brown.
And I'm Luke Shelton.
Every other week, we share with you an interview of a Tolkien scholar or fan.
That's right. In these interviews, one of us asks our guest to respond to 6 questions that help us learn about their personal Tolkien experience.
We are so excited to share this podcast with you. So without any more delay, let me introduce our guest. Hi everybody, and welcome back to the Tolkien Experience Podcast. Dr. Sarah Brown here with a really special guest. I am excited and delighted to introduce Mr. Shaun Gunner. Welcome, Shaun.
Hi, thank you for having me.
Oh, you are very, very welcome. We're delighted that we've managed to get you onto the podcast. Now, just to introduce Shaun to anybody who's been living under a rock for the past goodness knows how many years, Shaun has been the chair of the Tolkien Society since 2013. In fact, he joined the committee in 2011 and has been a member of the Tolkien Society for 15 years. So he is what is known in the Tolkien world as a significant figure, I think we could say. Don't you reckon, Shaun?
I don't think everybody's preferred. Is that significant figure with a capital S and capital F? I don't think anyone's ever said that to me before, but it's very kind of you to say so.
Mr. Shaun Gunner, significant figure of Tolkien. Oh, why not? It sounds like a good title to me. So, Shaun, we're really, really pleased to have you because one of the things I want to say before we get started is I want to extend my congratulations to you and to the entire Tolkien committee for the absolutely amazing and fantastic Tolkien Society conference that you put on in Birmingham last summer, because it was spectacular.
So yeah, thank you. We wanted to celebrate our 50th anniversary in style. The Society was founded in 1969. And it has such a special place in members' hearts. We wanted to make sure that we celebrated it in the right way. So it was about 2 years worth of planning to put the event together. And I'm so delighted that the feedback has been overwhelming and extraordinarily positive. It was one of the things that you're never quite sure when you do these sorts of things is it going to quite hit the mark the way you hope it would? And one of the ways I realised that it was doing that was we had a survey that we sent to everybody after the event, and one of the questions in it was, has the event met your expectations? And you had 3 options, which was fall short, met my expectations, and exceeded the expectations. And I filled in the survey as well because I was someone who attended the event. And I myself ticked the box that it had exceeded my expectations, and which is quite bizarre when I, of everyone else, knew exactly what to expect from the event. I knew more than anyone else, and even for me, I came away feeling like it exceeded my expectations. And again, I think that is actually about not necessarily the organisation, although the team did do a fantastic job, and I basically did very little. I really did just chair the event, but I think it's down to the extraordinary people we have in the society. We had 550 people from about 40 different countries come to the event, and just the warmth and the reception and the welcome from everyone, whoever they were, from wherever they are in the world. I felt like that is what made the event. It was just such a fantastic atmosphere. I don't know when we'll do another one that's quite the same, but we are tentatively putting 2024 in our diaries. So we may be having a large event that year. Whether I'm organising it then, I don't know. Whether I'm still a significant figure come 2024 is still to be determined. But I think what it showed is that when we really put our heart and soul into it, we can organise a truly magnificent event. And I feel like we really did honour the Tolkien Society's 50-year history and honour Tolkien at the same time, and that was what we wanted to do, and I feel like we have achieved that. And the feedback from people like you and from the other 550 attendees seems to indicate that we really did achieve it.
Oh, I absolutely think so. There was such a wonderful mix of people there. There were people who were, real academics, and then people who weren't academics but were there because they just love Tolkien. And the range of things that were available for people, from the academic talks all the way through to amazing entertainments. It was just the best few days. And I'm really happy to hear there might be another one in 5 years. I'm going to put that one in my calendar straight away. That sounds wonderful. Excellent. Right. Well, again, thank you for that. But now back to some questions about you personally. I'd love to know, Shaun, how you were first introduced to Tolkien's work.
So when I was growing up, my dad would always take me to the library in my village of Rustington that I grew up in, and I still live there. So pretty much every Saturday he took me to the library. And the first time I encountered Tolkien's works was seeing the David T. Wenzel's illustrated version of it, the graphic novel version of The Hobbit. And I read that maybe when I was about 8 or 9, somewhere around that age. I liked it, but I didn't love it, and it probably wouldn't have by itself made me read more Tolkien. Yeah, I remember it quite distinctly, reading it and enjoying it, and particularly liking the dragon. I enjoyed the dragon.
Mm-hmm.
A boy of 8 years old tends to like dragons. But yeah, it didn't get me into Tolkien more widely. What did get me into Tolkien more widely was the Peter Jackson films. So when The Fellowship of the Ring came out, I was 13.
Oh my goodness.
Now
I feel so old.
In 2001. You think how I feel when I've spent over a third of my life on the committee of the Tolkien Society, think about that as as a tragic thought. It was, so when I saw a trailer for the Fellowship of the Ring when it was due out, when I was 12, I guess 12 or 13, and I thought this looked quite exciting, and I decided that I should read the book. I was like, I should read the book before I go and see the film, so I know what's going on. Because I had to admit that even from the trailer, it looked like a complicated story. So I decided to read the book, and then it was, I quite enjoyed this. I was like, this is quite exciting. There's a lot more going on here than I anticipated. And then so I finished Lord of the Rings, and the films came out, and I was getting really into the films as well. I was like, this isn't exactly what happens in the book, but it's quite good fun. And then I started exploring, thinking, well, what else is this guy? What else has he written? And I read the Silmarillion, and I love the Silmarillion. And to answer one of the following questions, the Silmarillion is one of my favourite pieces of Tolkien's work. I'll come on to that in a minute. And I read Unfinished Tales, and I read what was actually a fairly new-ish collection at that point in time, Tales from the Perilous Realm. And I started realising that this guy was trying to do, and generally succeeding, so much more than I appreciated. And that's why, in a funny way, if I'd read the Hobbit book rather than see the graphic novel back when I was 8 or 9, I may have come to Tolkien a little bit sooner, a couple of years sooner than I actually did. Mm-hmm. But that was really, it was the advent of the films was the thing that really made me think to myself, I should check this book out. Then, they're making films of it, I should try and understand it. And as I was 12 or 13 at the time, I was the kind of perfect age really for kind of getting into it and enjoying it. So it's always stuck with me. That first experience of reading Lord of the Rings. I remember that the level of amazement I had when Tolkien seemingly killed Gandalf off, and then brought him back. And I still remember talking about it with my friends. and almost in disbelief at what had happened in the story. And it's something that I think always sticks with you. The first time you read a story that you absolutely love, for the first, when you read it for the first time, that experience that you have that you can never repeat, and those feelings and thoughts you have, they've really stuck with me. And I still now, when I read The Lord of the Rings, I think about how I felt the first time I read it. So I think that's probably how it was the films that brought me there. But they would never have kept me there. It was always Tolkien that did it, and I can see why Amazon will want to do a TV series because of the depth of the history that Tolkien created. There's a lot there you can play with, and there's a lot there to delve into. And I'm a little bit apprehensive about it, how it's going to go. A little bit excited, and I hope. I do sincerely hope that many more people will, when the TV series does come out, go and read The Lord of the Rings and The Silmarillion, Unfinished Tales, and The Hobbit, and all the rest, and will come to love them the way that I've come to love them.
And then come and join the Tolkien Society.
And come and join the Tolkien Society, yes.
Yes, which would be an excellent idea.
It would.
You can never have too many members of the Tolkien Society.
You can't, no.
So you are kind of excited for the Amazon series, just a little bit concerned about where they might go with it.
Yeah, I do, I've heard bits and bobs, and I can read between the lines about what they're kind of generally planning on doing. And I was one of the first people when they started releasing the maps to say they will be doing the Second Age, because I could see where they were headed here, and I am excited of seeing that. I'm excited to see that story of Sauron and the betrayal of the elves. I'm really excited to see that. I think that's a fantastic storyline to witness, and dramatically, I can see why, if you're Amazon, I can see why you'd choose to do that story. And I could see why you could also choose a story of Sauron deceiving the Númenóreans and corrupting them. I can see why you would choose to do that as well. So I completely understand. I think these are fantastic narratives, and it's like, why do people keep doing adaptations of Sherlock Holmes and Dracula and Alice in Wonderland and Peter Pan and A Christmas Carol or Agatha Christie? Because these are classic stories, and this is a classic story, and it's part of our heritage, our literary heritage. So the bit I'm nervous about is, will it feel right? So that's the thing about The Hobbit, that films, that always upset me. So the Lord of the Rings films, and I know people get upset usually about Faramir or Arwen or whatever, but that they did broadly feel kind of right. They felt like they were in a world that felt pretty similar to the one that Tolkien had.
Yeah, they felt authentic.
It did, but the Hobbit ones never did.
No.
It never felt like you're in the same world as that book. And that's the bit that I'm worried about with the Amazon TV series, is that whether it's going to feel right. And we're not going to know that until we really start watching it. The difficulty for them is that we know a lot less of what, say, the Second Age feels like than we do the end of the Third Age. But on the positive side, I think the way they've released those maps, I think shows actually how dedicated they are to the fans. I think they get that there's a real massive fan interest, and they've got to get this right. And you can show that, they can see that by the fact you've got Tom Shippey and John Howe involved in the project.
Yeah, they've really signed up some big names, haven't they?
Yeah, so they're clearly determined to get this right, and so that comforts me a lot that they're doing that.
Yeah.
And I'm also comforted in a weird way that they haven't gone for massive big name cast.
Yes, because it might be more focus on the story and less on the big name that we should all know and be drawn to because of that.
Exactly. If you have got some, say you've cast Brad Pitt as Sauron,
Oh my lord.
Yeah, exactly. You know, is that actually that they're obviously not that interested in doing the story at that point, are they? They're just interested in getting people through the doors, buying Amazon Prime, watching the TV series, selling the rights because it's got Brad Pitt in it. They're not doing that. And again, that comforts me. That makes me suspect that they really do genuinely want to get it right. So I am hopeful. Again, I'm a bit nervous, but I'm hopeful. I shall certainly be watching it when it comes out. And I do wish them well as well. You know, I do want it to be a
yes,
success.
because it'd be wonderful if it's all done well. It'd be great for us.
Yeah, and I feel like there are good parts of the Tolkien community that feel, you know, including on the record elements of the Tolkien family who feel discomfort about some of the adaptations that have happened. And I would like that to go away, and I would like us to be in a situation more like, say, the Harry Potter fandom, where there's no sense of antagonism between the books and the films. It'd be nice if the Tolkien fandom could have a similar feeling where there isn't that sense of antagonism, because we do get that and you do see it, and I don't like it. And it's something that within the Tolkien Society I actively discourage, is this sense that somehow the books and the films are competing. Like, let's not do that. The films are not the books, and they're not trying to be the book. So let's not judge them as books. One of the things that I say to a lot of people is, even if you don't like the films, I think actually the strongest merit for them is as a example of literary criticism. You know, actually, what is Peter Jackson and Philippa Boyens and everybody else involved in the making of the films, what are they saying about Tolkien's story and the decisions that they've made and how they film it? And actually, I think if some people were a little less dismissive of the films and approach them from that angle, I think they might get a bit more from it. Because I think actually, again, I think one of the issues in the Tolkien community, sometimes we're not critical enough of Tolkien. I feel like sometimes we can be a little bit too apologetic, some borderline sycophantic at times, and I don't think that's right. I think we should recognise that he may have faults. You know, why is it, as an example, every single adaptation cuts out Tom Bombadil?
Yeah,
there is a reason for that, and people shouldn't just respond with, you know, Tolkien knew what he was doing, Tom Bombadil was great. Okay, fine, but everyone cuts him out. Like, literally no one leaves him in. And when people complain about the Lord of the Rings films, they focus a lot on the character of Faramir, but no one, I never hear this mentioned, about the fact that 5 chapters from basically leaving the Shire to arriving in Bree are just removed. Why does no one ever mention that? You know, because for some reason, people say they don't like how the films changed the book, made changes from the books. Well, they don't mind that change. So what is it actually? There is something there. There are questions to be asked and answered about actually how people respond to Tolkien's works and what appeals to them and what doesn't appeal to them. My own sort of theory about this is that people are fundamentally attracted to the characters, and that different people associate with different characters. So I think that's the reason why a lot of people get quite upset about, as an example, about Aragorn, for instance, about Faramir, sorry, as an example, about the way his character has changed, or Frodo, for instance. But they don't get very upset about the fact that they don't get to see the Old Forest or the Barrow Downs. Like, no one gets very upset about that. And I think that's because the strength of Tolkien's writing is about how he captures the human condition in the different characters. And because people then get drawn to characters, it's that which really, really grates with people. You know, Arwen and Glorfindel, as another example, seems to upset a lot of people. And so for me, I wonder if that is the nub. And again, it goes back to, how do people respond to Tolkien's work? And is is it because of the characters that they're responding to it? And that's why when the characters get altered with, that they then get upset. And I think back to, 2 minutes ago, I was talking about the Amazon Prime series, and the example I gave of the thing that may upset me would be making Brad Pitt as Sauron. I did the same thing. It's actually, again, it's about how do these characters think and feel and behave.
Yes, that's a really interesting perspective to have, actually.
Yeah, it's something I've thought a lot about in the past. Is just about, is it actually the characters that really get people to love the stories, not just like them, but to love them. And thinking about a Tolkien book that's I'm less fond of, as it happens, is The Hobbit. So The Hobbit has never been. I enjoy The Hobbit, I like The Hobbit, but I don't love The Hobbit. And I've often wondered if that's because the relative shallowness of the characters compared with The Lord of the Rings, more because of the length of the book. So you have an awful lot of characters, and each character doesn't get, aside from Bilbo and Thorin, really, each character doesn't get that much speaking time in the story. And I wonder if that's part of the reason why I've never been so strongly attracted to it. Although having said that, see, now I'm questioning myself. My favourite part of Tolkien's work is the Silmarillion. I've always enjoyed the Silmarillion more than the Lord of the Rings, because you see for the first time the depth of the history of the world, and you get a bit of appreciation for this in the Lord of the Rings, like in the Council of Elrond, and when you go through the appendices, you start understanding the history of the world and what's happened before. But it's more just a glimpse, and then in the Silmarillion you actually begin to understand it. You actually understand that there are different tales and stories of magnificence comparable with the Lord of the Rings that also exist in this world and in the author's head. And isn't that incredible? Isn't that incredible what happened in Gondolin or with Beren and Luthien?
Yeah, so it provides context for your reading as well of The Lord of the Rings.
I think it does, but I also think you see the world differently. So one of the areas where, again, I think people should be a little bit more critical of Tolkien is how he sees good and bad. Certainly in The Lord of the Rings, it's quite binary, who is good and who is bad. Generally, fairly binary. In the Silmarillion, that's not really the case. It's more iffy, I think it's fair to say.
Yeah, a lot more shades of grey, aren't there?
Particularly if you're in the House of Fëanor, definitely are quite a few shades of grey there. And I think for me that's also one of the things I quite like about it. Going back to how Tolkien depicts humanity and the human condition, you see a lot more variety, I think, in the Silmarillion. So I've always really enjoyed it for that reason. And one of the things that every year, at Oxenmoot, the chair of the Tolkien Society does a reading from Tolkien's one of Tolkien's works at the graveside. That's how we finish Oxenmoot every year, and every single year, I am desperate to pick a reading from the Silmarillion because it's my favourite. As the chair, I want to. I basically, and one year I did pick out my favourite passage, and I said that I was reading this passage because it was my favourite, and that was the reason I gave. And so it was a little bit perhaps selfish of me, but yeah, there has to be a little perk to being chair of the Tolkien Society, and I guess getting to read your favourite passage to 200 people, I guess, is a slight benefit of the job.
And why not? Why not? Well, I think we've taken care of the question, what's your favourite part of Tolkien's work? But is there a particular story in the Silmarillion that you enjoy the most?
Well, yeah, the story I enjoy the most is probably the Children of Húrin.
Yeah.
But I think actually the passage that I enjoy the most is the death of Fingolfin, where he challenges Morgoth in single combat.
Yes, that's a wonderful passage, isn't it? It's so poignant and heartbreaking, and so full of incredible imagery. And I find that a very evocative piece, actually. Yes.
And just the power of like the three words,
Yeah.
and Morgoth came.
Yeah. It's all you need to say, isn't it? And you can just feel that vibration in the air. It's stunning writing. So you're going to read that at Enyalier this year?
Well, that was the passage that I read. I think it was 2 years ago. I read that. So I have done that. I haven't picked my reading for Enyalier this year. I tend to actually do it very late. On one case, on the morning of Enyalier, I picked the reading. I often go into Oxford weekend with like 2 or 3 in my head that I think I might read, and then as the weekend develops, I will narrow that down based on how I'm feeling at that weekend.
Mm-hmm.
Last year, I read The Tale of Aragorn and Arwen from the Appendices, and pretty much everyone cried. And because I read the ending of it.
Mm-hmm.
So yeah, it was quite moving, as you can imagine.
Yeah, so I mean, some of the passages in most of the books that you could pick up by Tolkien, some of those passages are going to just bring you to tears. I think one of my favourites is the death of Theoden. That one always gets me, and then there's Galadriel's Namarie, which is always stunning.
Yeah, the passage that I think particularly moved people one year was I did the deaths of Beren and Luthien from the Silmarillion. I did the end of that chapter, and that really moved people the year I did that. And actually, the first year I was chair, my reading that time was the Grey Havens, and that really got people going as well. So I've picked some I've picked some brutal ones as well, because it's a particularly moving.
Yeah, I will not say, do not weep.
Yeah, and then everybody started crying.
Yes.
Yeah, so some of them can be quite
just
hard.
as well. Not all tears are an evil.
Yes, indeed. So yeah, I mean, I do as chair of the society, doing Enyalier is quite hard because you do have that weight of expectation on you. Like really strongly, that sense that there's people here from all over the world who've come to experience what they see as a profoundly moving moment at the end of the Oxford weekend. So I do actually, as chair, I find it quite challenging, and I understand that pretty much every single predecessor of mine also struggled with it, and none of them have. But no one's really enjoyed it. I have to admit, I have a real sense of relief when I finish, when I get to walk away from the graveside and get on the bus back to the college. I do have a sense of relief. But
yeah, it's quite the responsibility for such a poignant moment, isn't it?
It is, but one of the things about being chair of the society is that it has changed how I approach Tolkien and how I think about Tolkien, and so actually thinking about what my fondest experience of Tolkien's work is it's not singular, but it's probably every single year at the start of Oxenmoot when I welcome the first timers. The people who are coming to Oxenmoot for the very first time is probably my fondest experience, because actually people who sometimes they're from quite distant countries who don't know anybody else who is into Tolkien, and they come to Oxford for this quite a special moment. They may spend quite a lot of money to come as well, and seeing at the first time as welcome is the moment they realise they are amongst their people. They are with people. They are at home here, and that for me always brings me joy, because you can walk over to anybody and you can just start talking to them about anything, and they're like, "Yes, this is what I've come for. These conversations. I have come to talk about this." I really I often joke at the Oxford first timers that this is the only place where you're going to be able to engage with a random person in serious conversation about Appendix E of the Lord of the Rings, and it's true. Like you do it, and I love that, and I love the fact that there will be researchers at Oxford, and I will try to get them in touch with other people there. I'll say, oh, actually, you need to speak to this person. He's done some research on that, or actually, I can introduce you to Demetra or Andy or John, whoever is there, and I say, I'll introduce you. You can go and talk to them. They'll be delighted to hear from you. Because that's the other thing, the people coming can be quite shy as well. They don't quite know what to expect. They're really into Tolkien, but they may not be extroverted. So I will endeavour, particularly with these researchers, I will endeavour to get them to meet other academics so that they actually can further their own academic work as well. So that's quite important to me. But I do really enjoy the first timers event at Oxford. So it's in a funny way, it's not quite an experience of Tolkien's work per se, but it's the influence of Tolkien's work. Is that seeing the joy on people's faces slowly emerge as they realise that they are amongst people who get it. How many people do you know that really get it and really understand why this author is unique, and we should still care about him and his work? And I love that, and I love the fact that as chair of the society, I can for a little bit of me, Oxford broadly runs the way it's always run, but there's a little part of me that is influential in making that happen, and that makes me quite proud.
I think that's a really lovely thought, actually, because any big meeting of the Tolkien Society members like that, like Oxenmoot, is just a joy, because everybody's made to feel welcome, whether they're a big name person or somebody trying out a paper for the first time, or just there because they just love Tolkien and want to immerse themselves. Oxenmoot is just an absolute joy. I think that having your fondest experience being something like that, and just showing how much of a community we are, I think that's actually really important.
It is, and people realising that we aren't. This sounds awful, but I've heard the stereotype before that the Tolkien Society isn't just a lot of wizened old men poring over books. And it's actually a vibrant community, and there's everything here for everyone who's into Tolkien. And even if people never come back, which may be no fault of the society, they may be from New Zealand, and this was the only chance they're ever going to get to be in the UK at the time of Oxenmoot. I hope that the feelings that they have when they're there stay with them and make them appreciate not just the society but Tolkien as well. That Tolkien has inspired this to happen. Everyone is there because of Tolkien. He is creating those experiences now, 47 years after his death. He's still. This is the impact of him and his work, and I hope that anyone who comes to Oxenmoot really, or any Tolkien Society event, really appreciates that.
I'm sure they do. So you've just been talking about Tolkien's work and appreciating it and how it brings people together. What about you yourself? How has your approach to Tolkien's work changed over time, or has it at all?
No, it definitely has. So again, it's a lot of this is through the prism of being the chair of the society in a funny way. So you have to remember that's I'm an abnormal fan, and for that reason, I am in a reasonably unique position in the fact that I get to chair the organisation, and I, to a certain extent, have an element of, with the other trustees of the society, have an element of directing what Tolkien fandom as a whole thinks and does. And that also comes down to really simple things like what we put on our Twitter and our Facebook pages. Because that gets shared quite widely by literally tens of thousands, in some cases millions of people will see those. And so I'm quite conscious that as the chair of the society, there's that slightly uncomfortable leadership position in kind of directing or framing the debate about what people think and feel about Tolkien's work, or what's in the news about Tolkien right now. But my approach has probably changed because as chair of the society, I'm required to do a lot of interviews like I'm doing now. So, I often go on the BBC News, or some random American radio station will phone me up at 2:00 in the morning and I'll do an interview or whatever it is. And I'll just do it. And I'll say, yes, I'll do it because, as chair of the society, that's my job. It's my job to promote the organisation and promote Tolkien. But one of the consequences of doing that, this sounds really funny, but I have to make sure I'm well briefed. There is no one to brief me. I don't have a press office that sets and tells me what I have to say and have to not say. So I have to make sure that I know what I can and can't say and what I should and shouldn't say before I do an interview. So one of the things that's changed about my approach to Tolkien was, and again, this sounds brutal, but I used to not care at all about biographical information or biographies one bit. I wasn't interested in them. I didn't want to read them. My approach was broadly, I like Tolkien stories. He's a great man, but I just want to read the stories and enjoy the stories. And I can enjoy and appreciate from a theoretical position his skill in creating that and what he's trying to achieve as a wider mythology when it comes to the maps and the histories and the languages. But I don't need to read about the fact that he went on holiday to Whitby at this particular time, all that kind of stuff. So that was really my approach. One of the things that's changed is the fact that I do interviews and people ask me these things. So I've had to really swat up on this stuff over the years. So if there's something in the news about that's kind of connected with Tolkien, or so even it's a particular radio station, if it's like Yorkshire Radio, BBC Yorkshire, I will then make sure that I read about Tolkien's connections with Yorkshire because it's bound to come up in the interview.
Yeah,
and that's one of the things that's probably changed about the way I approach Tolkien and his works is the fact that I've had to be a lot more well read on his own life. So that's definitely changed. And the other thing that's changed is you can probably tell that, again, I'm probably slightly unconventional in that I'm willing to be more critical of Tolkien in general. And again, that's probably a consequence of having done that wider public engagement, because I go to events and I do interviews with people who actually don't really care about Tolkien. Not that they dislike him, but it doesn't really feature on their radar. Or people who've only casually encountered him, and because everybody, even at my work or in my personal life, people know that I'm the chair of the society. People will obviously talk to me about it, and it's interesting through those conversations what comes up, and that's probably made me be more open to critique of Tolkien. Like when people critique Tolkien for the lack of women in his stories, or how he treats ethnic minorities, for instance. And sometimes I think the Tolkien academic community is too dismissive of these criticisms. It doesn't really respond to them. It responds to them purely in a technical sense that they are responded to, but I'm not sure they're actually kind of dealt with. And that's something that's at the moment, that's something I'm becoming increasingly thoughtful on, is actually how can we start thinking about Tolkien in a different way and start approaching him in a bit more of as very much as a critical friend, because I think you have to accept broadly that no author gets everything right.
Yeah, absolutely.
But that kind of basic statement is something I think a lot of people in the Tolkien community wouldn't accept. They would say that he has got everything right, or if they said that he's got anything wrong, it'd be something that's not really a criticism, like, Tolkien's big error is that he didn't finish his amazing stories. It's not really a criticism of him. That's more like an administrative process that he didn't follow in terms of finishing his writings, rather than an actual critique of what he wrote.
Yeah.
So that's something that I'm increasingly thinking about now, as well. And it has impacted. Kind of to go on to the last question is whether I would recommend Tolkien's work, because actually, I mean, generally yes, and I always encourage people to read The Lord of the Rings, and to younger children, I will encourage Farmer Giles of Ham or Rover Random. I'm a big fan of Rover Random. Rover Random is probably my second favourite story after the Silmarillion. I love it. I think it's really cute. I would generally recommend those as well. But increasingly, I wonder whether readers will understand it in the same way as they may have done in the past. So you come across people reading fiction now that is really pushing the boundaries when it comes to. So one of the areas where at the moment I'm reading a lot of feminist fiction. I'm loving it. Like genuinely loving it. So I've reading things like The Power or Vox or Handmaid's Tale, all these sorts of books, right? All about women's empowerment in a man's world, and how that can change and how or not change. And that's something that's fairly new in the way that it's at the moment it's now become popular fiction in a way that it wasn't before. And again, it comes back to my point about whether we as a community are dealing with those criticisms of Tolkien, because increasingly, there are friends of mine who, I think if they read The Lord of the Rings, would be aggressively critical of it in some ways, where people would argue about the lack of women in it, that there are, there's the Fellowship has 9 members in it, not a single one is a woman, or the treatment of ethnic minorities, or generally the idea of race. Aragorn's right to rule is based on his bloodline. It's not based on his ability. He does have the ability, or he has a ability, but the assumption is that it's based on his bloodline. And those are. I don't think we should shy away from the fact that is a bit awkward. That does feel a bit awkward in the 21st century, and I know it's not always appropriate to judge people of the past by the standards of today, but we're reading the book today, we're not reading the book in the past, so there has to be some recognition about the awkwardness that some of those things create. Because I feel sometimes now I read a passage and I feel a bit awkward about it.
Yeah, I think that's actually really interesting, Shaun, because I think you're right in that it's our duty as 21st century readers, 21st century academics, to not brush these issues under the carpet, but to actually address them and be open about addressing them. I think Dimitra Femi, of course, has started reopening a conversation about Tolkien and, whether racism is to be found in Tolkien's work. And I think these are important conversations.
Yeah, I agree, and we need to discuss it, because the problem is if we don't, we create a vacuum and other people fill that vacuum, and you get a situation. One of the things that's as chair of the society, I see all the lovely stories from our members and from the Tolkien communities all throughout the world, but I also see some of the not nice ones. And one of the not nice things that we've seen is that there are often far-right politicians who have used The Lord of the Rings as a defence of sometimes racist ideologies.
Yeah.
And they wouldn't be able to do that if the Tolkien community had a robust conversation about those works. The problem is that we've created a void and other people have filled that void. And that's when, as I go, going back to when I talk to people about it, I'm surprised how often the question of race comes up when in people's minds and in people's thoughts when they're considering whether to read the Lord of the Rings or not. And I suspect that's not going to go away anytime soon. So I think you're right with Dimitri is an excellent example, and there are other areas where I think we need to examine Tolkien and think about him properly and critically, and not just slavishly, which is what I fear we sometimes some very, very good Tolkien academics have done that because they really enjoy his works, and that's the thing that I don't ever want to do.
Well, Shaun, I think you've actually raised some really important questions, and I think you're right. Shying away from these questions will not do us any good in the long run. So I think that's actually a very important note to finish our talk on, because I think that's a challenge out there for those of us who are part of the world of Tolkien academia. The challenge is there for us to address these concerns and to have that important conversation, as you say, before the vacuum is filled by others.
Yeah, and the Tolkien Society is an organisation. We're a charity that exists to educate the public in the life and works of J.R.R. Tolkien, and I think we would always be open to helping, supporting, facilitating that conversation to happen. And I'm pleased to see that it is now, questions are being asked, it is beginning to open up a bit, and I think you're absolutely right. It's the Tolkien community in this respect probably needs to step up a little bit more.
Well, Shaun, on that note, I think we will draw this really interesting conversation to a close, but I do want to finish by thanking you once again for giving us your time and for appearing on the Tolkien Experience podcast.
Thank you very much for having me.
Very welcome, and I shall see you at Oxenmoot.
See you later.
We are so thankful that we have such gracious scholars and fans who want to share their Tolkien experience with us and with you.
We have a lot of fun making these podcasts.
So much fun. It's always exciting to talk to fans and scholars about their Tolkien experience.
If you want to know more about the ways to connect with this episode's guest that they mentioned in this interview, we provide show notes at tolkienexperience.com. Also, don't forget to follow the podcast on your favourite social media sites.
That's right. We're on Facebook as Tolkien Experience, and also on Twitter as @TolkienEXP. So don't forget to like, follow, share, and comment, because we love interacting with you just as much as we enjoy talking with our guests. You can also follow our personal Twitter accounts. I am @LukeB.Shelton.
You can also look for me on Twitter, where I am @AaronL.Palmadill. You can find the podcast on all major podcast services, including Apple, Stitcher, and YouTube.
Thank you for listening to our podcast. We truly hope that, in a way, it contributes to your own Tolkien experience.